All right. So I was asked by Neil to also talk about how I built my 32-inch. This is the back of my house. I don't know if anyone knows Babak Trefeshi, but he took this photo, and he's a great nighttime photographer. But the reason I built it is because I'm primarily interested in galaxies, in case you hadn't noticed. And every house deserves an observatory. Well, this is the third observatory I built, and the other two I've had to shovel out snow to get to it in winter. So when we moved to this location in Gloucester, which has a border 4.5 sky, I said, no more snow. Now I observe in my slippers. Okay, and that's a nighttime view which I took. And here's the scope. So, do I have? Yeah. It's, what makes this unique is it's not a Newtonian, so there's no coma. What happened was I built an earlier 32-inch that I had in New Hampshire, and it was a straight Newtonian. It had coma, but I fixed that with a Teleview optic that corrects coma, but it's not as good as if you don't have it to begin with. And when I was going to start making the scope, by the way, everything you see is handmade. There is nothing bought here. Every part is from junk that I reworked on my lathe, the milling machine, and all the optics were handmade. When I was going to start making this, I was going to do another Newtonian, because that's what I know how to build. I've been building them since a teenager. My parents were immigrants from Italy, couldn't afford a big scope, so somehow I managed to convince my father when I was 13 they was going to buy me a small store-bought refractor. Just give me the money and I'm going to grind. He was pretty skeptical, but he finally agreed. But he said, this is all you're getting. I said, okay. So I made an 8-inch f7, and I've been making them ever since. And I'm a past president of the ATMOB, and I'm the MC for Stellafane. And the thing about commercial optics, I mean, not specialty optics like Mike is going to talk on Thursday, but most commercial optics, you know, if you're a business, as soon as it reaches minimum criteria, quarter wave, it's out the door because they have to make money. Most amateurs aren't going to stop at quarter wave. I certainly don't. They're going to, so that way, almost all the entries at Stellafane would put to shame any commercial optic because they work it till it's perfect. Why not? You know, you spend a year and a half grinding a mirror, spend a few extra months and get it perfect. Businesses can't think that way. They're a profit motive. So this is, when I was going to do another one, a friend of mine, Scott Milligan, who's a professional optical designer. Anyone remember when Hubble had a flaw? Okay. So he was part of the 30 plus engineering team to come up with ideas to fix it. Okay, so if anyone else proposed this elaborate contraption, I would have said, you're insane, leave me alone. But since he did fix the Hubble, I listened to him. And his idea was, you know, why do we have as minimum number of surfaces, if you think about it? The reason is every time you reflect off aluminum, you're getting back, if it's standard optics, standard enhancement, about 90% of the light and 10% is lost. If you have 11 surfaces, you're down to 50%. So in the old days, you'd never make multiple optics, right? The only reason you can do multiple optics is if you have good coatings. Let me put it a different way. If you hold up a glass, you can see it. Why do you see it? Because 10% of the light reflects off glass. Not all of it transmits through. If it did, you'd be invisible. Okay, so if you think of that, rather than doing a simple mirror and flat secondary, and the reason for that all these years was to minimize the number of reflections, because when you got 2 reflections, you're down to 80% of the available light. But if you have good coatings, and these newer coatings that were developed in the 90s when they first came out actually were prohibited from even being sent overseas. They were built for the Air Force and NASA only, but now they're readily available. And they're so good that one of these corrector lenses, if you hold it in your hand, which I've done, and you hold it at an angle, it looks like a mirror. But as soon as it becomes 90 degrees, it essentially disappears. 90.3% of the light goes through. There's essentially no reflection. It looks like it's disappeared in your hand. All you see is a rim.
99?
Not 99.3% is transmitted. And that's what makes a multiple lens system feasible, okay? Otherwise, there'd be no point in building it. So he proposed, he gave me, we worked on it, brainstormed on this for a year. He initially wanted me to do a 24-inch, and I said, I already have a 32. There's no way I'm going less than 32. So he so he finally upgraded it. He did the design. I just followed directions well. And I ground, when I first did my first 32-inch for a scope in New Hampshire, anyone know Arnie Hendon from the AAVSO? Yeah, he bought my old 32-inch. It's still up there. And that one is a Newtonian, has coma. This is a spherical primary. When I ground my first 32-inch, it took me 6 months to get to a sphere, 2+ years to turn it into a parabola, and I could barely get better than quarter wave. It was okay. It worked fine. It just didn't, like, I couldn't take planets with it because it's barely quarter wave. Okay? A sphere is ridiculously easy. So this is a 20th wave sphere. And I did it without hardly any thought, because a sphere, when you're grinding and polishing, it automatically goes to a sphere. You just follow, proper safeguards. But so it's a 20th wave primary. It goes to a Mangan, which is a flat back and a special curve with an index of refraction that required a special O'Hara glass from Germany. He actually made this one, so that's the one part I didn't make, because I'm terrible at flats. Goes through a field stop, which is important. This is a scope that if you shine a flashlight on the edge like this, you barely notice it in the field. Try that on your scope. And the reason is because the field stop is so good. Only the light coming from this cone will get through it. Then it has a doublet, which all 4 surfaces are sphere, easy to make. Another singlet and another singlet. And by the time it gets to the end, I have a 42 arc minute diameter cone of light that is completely coma free and completely flat. And the views through it are spectacular, even on planets, visually. So I'll show you some stuff on it.
So there's a lot of noise. What's the final shape of your primary?
Sphere.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a 20th wave sphere. And spheres are easy to make. That's the whole point.
So did you do
Every surface here is a sphere except for the flat on the back. Much easier to make. Wouldn't do that for a 10-inch, but for a big scope, it saves you an enormous amount of time.
Did you do some ghost analysis?
What's that?
Did you do some ghost analysis?
Yes.
So many lenses?
Yeah, I have an engineer at MIT who has access to one of those crazy supercomputers. The whole thing was designed on a supercomputer. So all my friends have donated their time. If I had to pay for it, the scope would be worth several million.
And when they designed this multiple system, did they take care on the tolerances, that you have enough tolerances to build it?
Yep.
Sometimes you can design something perfect.
No, spheres are easy to make. It's real easy to make a sphere.
For columnating, that you are able to columnate the whole system.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point, and I'll talk about that later. You have a number of freedoms. The primary, you got the standard 3, it's at 18 points, but final 3 corrections in order to center it on the secondary. The secondary, when I built that one, and I'll show you a picture of it, has in and out movement. It has a tilt, and it has a up and XY movement. So it's a bear to collimate. But once it's collimated, it's fine. It doesn't tolerate miscollimation. That's a problem. But again, it's a permanent observatory, so I spent a few nights collimating. Once it's done, it's done. So this was in Sky and Tell in 2012, by the way. 2011, May of 2011. This is my first dome in Lynnfield, Massachusetts. It housed a 16-inch, which I built. That's a legitimate 16th wave primary, which it's a Newtonian, but it works very nice. This is my second dome in New Hampshire that housed my first 32, which is here. That is now sold to Arnie Hendon, who is a prior director of the AVSO. It was kind of funny. He was at my house observing. This is back in 2003 or 4. And he was sitting for dinner before observing, and he goes, I'm going to retire in a year, and I've been looking for a place just like this. I want to put up an observatory just like this. I want a house on a lake just like this. My wife and I look at each other. We're thinking of selling next year. Sold! Literally, we sold the whole place in about 3 seconds. Including the telescope. So I didn't have to take anything apart, which was fantastic. And now occasionally I get to observe with that one in the dark sky area. So, but I wanted to build something. Lynnfield was starting to get too light polluted. I give lots of talks on light pollution, by the way, about 20 of them this past year alone. But anyways, move closer. Cape Ann, everyone knows Cape Cod. Okay, Cape Ann is on the north side, and I'm out close to the water, so away from most light pollution areas. So the first thing I had to do if you're going to build it part of the house is put a pier so my wife can walk around the house without me having to strap her into bed so it doesn't shake the telescope, right? And that's just done. So if neighbors came by, actually got a variance to allow a little higher for the dome. But they came by and said, where's the bridge? And the thing to do is you make curves. The way to do that is just take an ordinary router and attach it onto a piece of wood that you can slide in and out with marks so you get an outer edge and inner edge, and just stack up the wood. And have a huge stack of parts, and that's how you make your, because if you're gonna, this is a 20-foot dome. If you look at Ash Dome, that's $90,000. My whole dome cost me $2,000. Okay, it's easy to build. Just follow simple directions. So you make all these parts from plywood, then you stack them and screw them together with lots of wood glue. Use marine grade glue so it doesn't separate. And then I'm a member of the Amateur Telescope Makers of Boston, and if you feed them pizza and beer, they'll work for free. So in one weekend, as the house was being built, we put up the entire dome. I had made parts for 6 months, of course. So here we are. The dome parts use fiberglass. There's a place in New Hampshire called Calwell Corporation. They have places all over the country. And it's funny, this is structural fiberglass, and if you buy it by the square foot, it's like $20 a square foot, which is ridiculous, very expensive. But the secret is, if it's, they have cutoffs, and if it's 7.5 feet, they basically throw it away because they can only sell the 8-foot pieces. So you wait till they have, after a few months, they have a stack of cutoffs. I went there, and they basically give it to you for free. So I took a whole bunch of fiberglass. So the dome was free, the skin. The labor was free. It did cost me pizza and beer and some plywood. Here we are putting up 2 days in a row, 12-hour days, but we got the dome up. And that's in its final form, and it works great. Anyone can build a dome. If you don't want to get that elaborate, do a roll-off. But I got to say, prior to building domes, what I call primitive astronomy, bringing our telescope into the backyard, takes an hour to polar align and get everything ready. Okay, that's for the birds. Build a dome, you'll be much happier. Ever since I've built domes, I'm able to basically in a minute's notice open up and I'm ready to go. That's my north. That's my south. Okay, I love trees, but don't get in my way. And here's the brain trust. Pavolelli worked for iTech. He's an optical engineer, and that's Scott Milligan over there, who actually designed this scope. He's an optical engineer as well. And this gentleman here worked for Intel. He worked on the electronics, and I was his beta site. Now he's selling them for a couple of thousand each, astrometrics. It works well. I was his beta site, so I got it for free. Like I said, everything's handmade, and what's that?
Pizza and beer.
Yep, good to have friends. The next thing you do is go to a junkyard and buy lots of scrap aluminum. I got a lathe from a company going out of business in Lawrence, Massachusetts. Back in the 90s, when the push went to CNC machining, basically all the old lathes became useless, and they were just selling them for scrap. So for $800, I got a $30,000 lathe, and had it delivered to the house. So now I have a lathe. The lathe is 2 years younger than me. The lathe was made in '54, but it still works great. You know, CNC machining is great if you have to make 100 parts. You just plug it in once and it makes them. But if you're making parts of one, it's more of a pain in the neck to program it than it is just to make it. So for me, this is fine. And Polaroid went out of business in Massachusetts early 2000s. A friend of mine who worked there they were selling it to employees when they were closing it up. So I got that for the scrap price too. So basically for $1,500, I got a great lathe and a great milling machine. Then I needed a polar axle. I could not find a round piece of aluminum. But then a different friend of mine who worked for Intel had some older centrifuges that they used to dope chips, and they were getting rid of them to get bigger ones. So this is basically a 32-inch perfectly balanced piece of aluminum that was made to spin at 20,000 RPM, and they would dope the chips that were put in this. And it has cooling holes for water lines through it. So since I'm only spinning it one per day, this works great. And it's unbelievably machined. I was told that this one piece of aluminum back in 1980s cost Intel $18,000. You know, I got it free, so great. You got to learn to scrounge if you're an amateur astronomer. See these little divots here? Those were made so it's perfectly balanced within a gram. I didn't have to touch it. I just used it for my polar axle. So I built the rest of it so it can have a 3-point. It has a 5-inch Timken that goes here. That I got at the Stellafane swap table for $10. I looked it up in a catalog. It's a $1,000 double race Timken when it was new. It's not rusted at all. It's perfect. And that's what the polar axle now looks like. This is a 15-inch buyer's gear. It's a little underpowered, but then I was able to get a hold of a 24-inch. I'll give that story later. So now it's run by a 24-inch. But at the time, the price of a 24-inch was just prohibitive. So anyways, this works great, and I used it in that. That's my old 16-inch up there. And then you got to build a fork arm. That one had to be done out of steel. Got scrap steel, and I don't do welding, so I just cut it up the way I wanted it and brought it to a local welder, and that was easy. So now I have the aluminum for that length would have too much flexure. At least that's what the people at MIT told me, who are friends of mine. So we ended up, so here is the basic contraption. Then one problem with this relay scope, remember it goes through a field stop and then gets relayed down with full lenses. If the primary and the secondary contractor expand more than 25 thousandths, it's hard to focus. It gets a little soft. So the way you avoid that is with carbon fiber and Inconel at the ends. So there's a little bit of contracture from this part, but not much. It's very short. But the carbon fiber prevents the expansion and contraction, and I solved the problem. The only problem was back in 2004 when I was putting this together, there was a carbon fiber shortage because all the airplanes were starting to be made out of carbon fiber. So it was ridiculously expensive. Another friend of mine who worked for the Air Force Space Agency said that basically all satellites have a clone on the ground. They make two, and one gets sent. They flip a coin as to which one's going to go up. And one gets sent, one gets kept on the ground. So whenever you say they're trying to figure out what something's wrong, they're working on the ground one to figure out what's wrong. So they decommissioned the Halo satellite, which was a U.S. spy satellite looking down and never looked out. That was a 24-inch spy satellite, is what I'm told. Anyways, it was made of carbon fiber, really thick stuff. This one's incredibly rigid. The walls are that thick. I mean, each piece of them must have cost the government, several thousand just for the carbon fiber. Well, it got decommissioned because I was looking around for some carbon fiber. I was able to go to his place of work. We cut it up with a hacksaw. I took it home. It cost me nothing. So that's the way to just scrounge well, and the carbon fiber solves the problem of expansion and contraction. This is probably the only scope for an amateur built that's rated for 12 Gs. But I'm told that carbon fiber is stiff enough for a 12G telescope. So there's the scope being put together. Surya Truss. The back end, this is part of the engineering diagrams we made, is carbon fiber as well. And I should say the mirror, well, we haven't gotten to the mirror yet. That was cast. So here's looking, if you can't walk through your telescope, it's not big enough. So that central tube with the 4 corrector lenses, these are all the parts for it. 26 parts just for the central corrector lens. And they were all made on the lathe, so all scrap aluminum, not a problem. That's my son next to it, and parts after painting. And all those so there's 26 parts in this alone. 582 parts to make the whole telescope that were hand touched or made.
How is the flexure?
Huh?
How is the flexure of all these parts?
There's no flexure. That's the whole point.
Why?
Why? Because it's well made. And I got.
Is that glue? Is that
Yeah. This stuff is incredibly stiff.
Is it correct?
Oh, that? It's similar carbon fiber, and parts are screwed in together. There's no problem at all.
But if you have a thread, you always have a little plate, whatever.
I don't see it. If I can see detail on planets like Mars, it's working okay as far as I'm concerned. So the primary mirror. In order to make this design, needed a central hole, and it had to be lightweight. If this was a full thickness mirror, it would be something like 700 or 800 pounds. By designing it this way with ridges, it only comes to 96 pounds, so it makes it feasible. Scott Milligan knew, Roger Angel from Arizona, who builds the big 8.4 meters. Okay, so one of his workers decided to start his own company, and he needed a test mirror. So he basically, for us, was willing to melt the glass in an oven, and it took 2 weeks to cool, so it'd be annealed, for just the cost of the glass, which was a really good, sweet deal. So he made this. The center is 5.5 inches, the edge is 1.5 inch, and it's lightweighted because it's all ridged. And rather than spending time designing it, he took the 8.2 meters, okay, and just scaled it down by 1/10. So basically, this is a 1/10 scale model of the 8.2 meters that all the professionals are using. It saved him time, and I got a cheap blank. So here is the mold he made. He put it in the oven, Here's the glass right after it's being taken out of the oven, after it's cooled down. How much time?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not timing anything.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if you're about to be yanked.
You're good.
Okay. So here it is shortly after being born. And here's my pride and joy before starting to grind and polish. So first thing to do is you got to make a tool. So this is that dental cement that you use to make tools, except on a much larger scale. Then you take glass and epoxy it onto it, and that's how you get a tool. Okay, and then start grinding with the carborundum. Here it is grinding. I built a lens grinding machine, and because there's no way you're going to do this by hand. And here it is in the grinding stages.
Where is it grinding there?
What?
What is being ground there?
This is the mirror.
Yeah.
Here is the tool.
Down there.
Right.
It's upside down.
Yes, upside down. Yeah. Yeah. If you want to deepen it, upside down. If you want to shallow it, you reverse it.
So what's up on top, Mario? Is that a machine?
This?
Yeah.
That just attaches to the spindle for the grinding. It's moving the mirror back and forth.
Did you design that?
There was some part, the ATMs was throwing out an old machine. I took it and made parts for it and built one.
Is your middle name Fred? Sanford?
Hey, if you're an amateur, you learn how to scrounge, right? You get free labor, free engineering advice, free electricians, and
I've got your phone number if I need something. How much does that mirror weigh?
96 pounds. Yeah, because it's lightweighted. Otherwise, it would be about 600 pounds. And here is now ready for polishing with the pitch. I use polishing pads just to speed it up, but that gives you ripple, but it gives you an early polish so you can get going.
And you configured it yourself? This configuration?
Yeah, it's right. Well, I didn't design I made that clear. A friend of mine, Scott Milligan, made the design, and I just followed directions.
That's it.
Yeah. So this ends up being an F3 primary. When it goes through the mangan, it comes out as F6. Here's Scott Milligan, and you can see the polishing is getting close to being finished. And you can see that it's the lightweighted design, conical design. Testing, okay, basically a tilt table. And then there was the first problem that came up. So the initial testing was just under quarter wave, which is nowhere near good enough. It turned out, remember I said he wanted a 24-inch and we just scaled it up to 32? Unfortunately, that started having some flexure in the mirror. But that's when we went to my friend in MIT who has a Cray supercomputer at disposal. So he modeled the entire scope into, it's called 18,000 elements. Basically breaks up the mirror into 18,000 bricks. And he said that if we follow 18 points mirror addition to the central post, then we can get it to better than 16th wave. Follow that blue line. So we tried it because I was really bummed out at that point. So we added this. Initially with the 24-inch it would have been just at the center, but with the 32 it was just so massive we needed these 18 points epoxied onto it. But it worked. And here's the proof. So here's a Ronke, perfectly straight. Okay, this basically says it's 16th wave optics. Then Spectrum Films, Tony Pereira, he's on Long Island. He owns his own shop. It's the only one I'll trust to coat my mirrors. He did an enhanced aluminum. It reflects 98% And here it is going into the chamber.
Is that the same spectrum as in Florida?
No, similar names but different. He does high-end work. He does for universities and government contracts. In fact, the rovers on Mars, he coded them. So here it is hung up, ready for luminization, and new mirror being born. Here it is. And here is the enhanced protected aluminum, so it's 98%. Here's the mangan secondary. This is the one part I didn't make. Scott Millen made the whole thing because, again, I'm terrible with flats. Anyone try to make a flat? It's a bear because you got to use 3 separate pieces of glass in addition to the one you got, and constantly trade between them. He had extra flats lying around. He could do it easy. And here is the flat on the back, perfectly straight. All right, now you got all these parts and you got to put it together into a telescope. You have another dome raising party, so you bring a whole bunch of friends, feed them lots of beer, and but you don't give them the beer until after the mirror is in place. And bring them up. That's my son and a whole bunch of friends, and we're putting up the parts together. Took a day, but we assembled everything, bringing up the fork arm. Oh no, that's the base of the mirror. Assembling. Here's the mirror. So you don't want dust. I'm a retired physician. I know where to get all this stuff. And there is the mirror being put into its cell. Assembly. I got one of those lift tables for several $100. Really good because whenever I have to take it out to clean it, I gently bring it down and up, and I don't have to have 20 slaves.
What's the weight of the mirror box?
Huh?
What's the weight of the mirror box with the mirror?
Well, the mirror is 96. With the metal box, it's about 130 pounds. So 4 people can handle it, basically. And here's the back end of the mirror. I built a tester just to make sure everything's collimated. That'll answer your question. So it's just a piece that sits in the back, and put a reflector on that end and laser, and just make sure that everything from here to that end is aligned. Once that's done, all you got to care about is the push-pull for the back end, and the 9 degrees of freedom for the mangan. The mangan is what takes all the collimation in and out, X, Y, and tilt. So there's a lot of collimation for the mangan, but once you get all this centered, it goes fairly easy. I got it all written down so when I die, other people know how to do it. So here is assembling the central parts with the mirrors, the corrector lenses. And here it is. So here's one of the corrector lenses. Notice it's reflecting. It looks like a mirror, right? Except when you turn it 90 degrees, it completely disappears. Absolutely disappears. Those anti-reflection coatings are something. So here is my scope. I should say something about this refractor, which is I use for wide field. It's a 6-inch triplet, Zeiss triplet. This is a true story. Back in around 1991, Roland Christian, you know who he is? Builds great refractors. That's when he was starting out. And he built 2 prototypes based on the Zeiss. This is not an Apo, it's a triplet, Zeiss triplet design. And he came up to Stellafane. I was having dinner with him the night before the meeting. And he said it cost him $1,500 in glass to build this. And he didn't think, he said he'd have to charge over $10,000. He said, no one in their right mind is going to spend that much for a 6-inch telescope. So he said, I'm just going to get rid of them on the swap table tomorrow for $500 each. I literally jumped on top of him, pinned him to the ground, and didn't let him up until he sold me one. So for $500, I got a $10,000 refractor. That was a great deal. Works great, by the way. That's my wide field scope. So here is in the scope, all set up. Here is the corrections, so it can go in and out. It's got adjustments for tilt, and back here in the back, it's got X, Y. So you got to make all those adjustments in order to get it perfectly collimated. Otherwise, you see a lot of coma. This requires perfect collimation.
Yes, the question I have is first you collimate the primary mirror, then the munching mirror, and how do you collimate all the corrector lenses?
I'm not lying. It takes a little bit of work. It takes me 2 nights to do a perfect collimation if I'm starting from scratch.
Depends on the corrector lenses?
The way I do it is the primary, well, first of all, the central is fixed. Once that's done, it's done. The main mirror, it's a 3-point collimation, and when it's centered through here, if this is off, it's got to go through the hole, all right? Once that's done, then it's all the corrections are here. And I have a tape measure. It's got to be a certain distance. That's the in and out, okay? After that, X, Y to make sure that the mirror is completely centered, and then the rest is all tilt.
Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah.
So you have a munching mirror and you have a primary mirror. But
Yeah.
in between you have 3 corrector lenses. And they also put
Those are all
pixels
fixed.
or
That I done at the beginning. Remember I said that I have a reflector where the collimation hole is, and I had that optic in the bottom, and I can swap that out for a laser. So I made all the corrections there. Once that's fixed, they're locked down. Nothing can move them. So whenever I have to take this off for recollimation or cleaning, it's just a matter of recollimating that. That's my control room. In winter time, I can control everything from here or from anywhere else in the house, and works fine. Stairs to get up. And I have a dummy terminal in the observatory so that if I want to come up and check on things, I can run it that way as well. This is how the dome turns. Got 4 motors, just friction. Turns out these are the things that keep leaves from going in your gutters. Just enough because I was doing without it, and occasionally the wheels would spin. But by just screwing those on, it grips fine and turns the dome. Cheap. And here is, remember I said this is a 15.5-inch Buyers gear? You know, anyone here know Buyers? Okay, so you know those are quality gears. When he first came out with his gears, he wasn't allowed to sell them commercially. They were a strictly government issue. Then later on, when that contract ended and he was given clearance to sell them, he said, who needs my quality gears? And he light dawned on him, amateur astronomers and professional observatories. So that's why he started selling in the late 70s. And I got this gear from him, 1983, for my 16-inch, and it worked great on that. On this, it's a little underpowered. And I checked with him. He wanted $12,000 for a 24-inch gear, and I said, I'm going to stick with this. That's too much. About 8 years ago, out of the blue, he gave his company to his son, and his son died in a car accident, tragically. So he took over again. He's now in his early 90s. This is 8 years ago. He was 92, and no one wanted to buy his company, so he's going to sell off pieces of it to different companies. And he called me out of the blue. He lives in California. I haven't talked to him in about 5 years. He says, remember that 24-inch you wanted? And I go, yeah. He goes, someone ordered one, never picked it up. I'll give it to you for $2,000. Okay. So I got a 24-inch, $12,000 worth Buyers gear for $2,000. I thought that was a good deal. For that, I bought it for. So now we just had to attach it. So I had a bunch of engineer friends of mine. We figured out a way to stabilize it so we can lift that old gear out. Here's the 24-inch. Beautiful gear. It's 720 teeth. I mean, he does incredible work. There's nothing more accurate than a Buyers gear. If you ever see, unfortunately, no more new ones are being made. But if you ever see one on the used market, they don't wear out. And so another engineering party, and we figured out how to take off the old gear, put the new one on. And I'm happy to say now it runs with a 24-inch buyer's gear, which in itself is a treasure. So it tracks perfectly now. Before I had to do a lot of corrections for guide. Now very few corrections because the gear is big enough. You know, the moment arm goes up by the fourth power, so it doesn't sound like much going from a 15.5 inch to a 24 inch, but it is a huge mechanical advantage. And has special motors so that it, and I have individual mini computers for the RA and for the deck, and that's all run by the bigger computer, coordinated I should say. And then I don't know if you know this guy, Mr. Perot. He's French. He lives now in Ohio. He used to be in Philadelphia, but he came up with an on-axis guider. Anyone use one of those? You use off-axis guiders, right? I don't like off-axis. For scope this big, the field of view is small, and an off-axis guider is hard to get the guide star. So out of the blue, he calls me up and says, I need a scope to test out a new invention, and I'll give you one. And I said, okay, fine, come on up. So he flew up and we tested this. Now, remember I showed you a picture of M83. In the past, before this on-axis guided, the stars were bloated, and because it's always low in the sky where I am. So he said, what do you want to test on? I said, okay, let's do M83 because that's a difficult object that was in the spring. And I knew if he could, I mean, this high over the horizon, if it can guide on that, I'm sold. So we took the first picture. The first sub was pinpoint stars. I said, I'm done. That's what I'm using from now on. So I use it has a mirror which allows only the infrared to go through, everything above 750 nanometers. Everything else goes up into so above 750 nanometers goes to my camera, and you guide on the same field of view that you're imaging. And it's easy to find a guide star now because you pick anywhere in the field. All right, that's what the back end looks like now. And I use a flat board for flats. I have 4 LEDs on the corners to light it up, and I get easy flats that way anytime I want. Right here, 4 LEDs lit up. That works great. Everything's cabled through the base, open and close with winches, and that's the final product.
Do you get snow in winter?
What?
Do you get snow and ice in winter time?
Yeah,
And what do you do to
nothing. The sun hits the dome, and because it's smooth, it just falls off. And if not, I have a snow rake if I need to, but in my location, I'm near the ocean, I don't get as much snow as inland. And lots of observing. That's the final. Okay, any questions?
Amazing.